Well, abortion in America, a hotly contested issue sparking debate and protest across the nation for nearly 6 decades. In that time frame, it's also taken the lives of more than 63 million unborn children. So how did a moral issue snowball into a political issue? On January 22nd, 1973, the highest court in our nation issued a 7-2 landmark decision, Roe versus Wade. It ruled the Constitution of the United States protected a pregnant woman's right to an abortion without government restrictions. It's a decision that's been ingrained in American politics ever since. And today we kick off our series Roe, the politics of life. And this week we're going to delve into the dark history of Planned Parenthood and abortion. We're going to talk to doctors who can help us really follow what the science says about life in the womb. And we're going to talk to lawmakers at the forefront of the fight for life who will take us inside the efforts to mend our broken foster care and welfare systems and push for paid family leave. And we're going to get a pulse on how Americans really feel about abortion and break down the latest polling. And lastly, we're going to discuss real solutions and real resources for pregnant women in crisis. But here's where we are right now. In just the last 2 weeks, the abortion battle has been reinvigorated after the Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's draft opinion that could overturn Roe versus Wade was leaked out to Politico. It's prompted attacks and violent protest around pro-life groups. And even so, Democrat lawmakers have been making their stance extremely clear. Watch.
Americans strongly oppose getting rid of Roe, and they will be paying close attention from now until November to Republicans who are responsible for its demise.
How dare they? How dare they tell a woman what she can do and cannot do with her own body?
I trust women. We should all trust women to make their own decisions that are in their best interest for themselves.
I chose to have an abortion. I walked proudly into Planned Parenthood.
Now all eyes are on June when the Supreme Court is expected to rule on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case, which called into question the constitutionality of a Mississippi state law that bans abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. The justice's decision here could trigger a challenge to Roe versus Wade. But for the last 12 months, states have been anticipating this ruling and preparing for what could be a post-Roe reality. For instance, Texas heartbeat law garnered national attention, banning abortion at the detection of a fetal heartbeat. It's one of the nation's most restrictive abortion laws, considering the flutter of a heartbeat can be detected as early as 6 weeks. And the law's passing is seen as a major win for pro-life movement and has inspired neighboring Oklahoma to do the same after seeing a surge of abortion patients with Texas zip codes. And Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, he signed into law a near total abortion ban, saying that he didn't want abortion seekers from Texas to come to his state for the controversial procedure. And most recently, he called on Native American tribes to not become sanctuaries for abortion patients. Well, this comes as deep blue states like the ones that you're about to see on your screen, California, Connecticut, New York, and the District of Columbia and more are vowing to become sanctuary states for women seeking abortions. But 22 states have passed laws that would restrict abortion should Roe versus Wade be overturned. Of those, 13 states have passed trigger laws that would outlaw abortion immediately if Roe is overturned. And those states are Arkansas, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. And West Virginia, it doesn't have a trigger ban in place should Roe be overturned, but Attorney General Patrick Morrissey says he intends to limit abortion as much as he legally can under the law. And West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrissey, he joins us now. General, welcome to the show. So you don't actually have a trigger ban in place right now in West Virginia. Is that something that the state is working on?
Of different issues. And Lindsay, first of all, let me thank you for having this important segment. I think the work you're doing is really important because it's not as simple as the decision comes out and then the states are going to act. There's a lot that goes into it. And let's start out with the most obvious one. First, we need to get the final opinion from the Supreme Court because there are so many permutations that could come out, even if there's some slight tweaks in Justice Alito's earlier draft. This is a really big deal that we get all the details in place. The second thing we're doing, and I think all states are looking at their own state constitutions. West Virginia does put certain restrictions on from a funding perspective, and there are laws that are on the books with respect to abortion. I do expect that our legislature will be taking that up, and they'll be analyzing the opinion, the state constitution, our existing state laws, and how they can set up a law that's going to be defended, that I can defend successfully in court, which is going to advance our shared pro-life principles. So that's what we're working on right now. And so there are a lot of states that are probably in a similar boat where some people have reported we have trigger laws, but some of the stuff that goes back to the 1920s or the 1800s, it's unclear how that would take effect. It all depends upon the actual text of the decision, presumably replacing Roe, and then the state's constitution and laws.
So we have seen many states go ahead and put laws into place, like Texas, like Oklahoma. I know that your House tried to pass, or did pass, a 15-week abortion ban, but actually failed in your Senate. The state is Republican controlled. So why did it fail in the Senate? Why wasn't it able to get through?
Look, I think we should be as aggressive as possible to protect life. So I'm one of the strongest pro-life attorneys general in the nation. So I will continue to be very aggressive and urge our legislature to act. I think that they will. I think a lot of people are waiting to see what was going to happen with the court decision. But I want to keep pushing the limits to have as much life protected as humanly possible. That's my goal. That's what I've been working on in West Virginia for a prolonged period of time. So I do expect our legislature will act in this area, and we're going to be very swift analyzing that opinion that comes out. And as I mentioned, I want to try to save as many babies as possible. That's the goal. I think that's what West Virginians want, and I think that's what the American people want as well.
So we have seen other states become abortion sanctuary states, Connecticut being one of those. For abortions, they're actually allowing for out-of-state patients can sue in their courts. If Roe does get overturned, there's a lot of talk about states suing other states. Is that going to be a constant legal battle for red states like you? How are you gearing up for these potential fights?
Well, I think that the basic principle that people have to take into account is that right now, what's being decided at the court is whether the absolutely flawed construct of Roe v. Wade and a lot of the cases that followed will remain in place. What that does is that returns the decision to the states, and it allows what our nation has done very well through its history to continue, that you're going to have a number of states all deciding different types of policy, because the court's going to make it clear that this is a case for state legislatures to act on. I think if that decision is clearly written, that's going to minimize some of the back and forth within the states, and that people know that if you're looking for the broadest array of protections from abortion, you're going to be looking to a state like West Virginia. You're going to look to Mississippi. You're going to look to some of the other states. If you're looking for a different type of a state, you may go and move to New York. You may go move to California. Now, let me be clear. I think we should be protecting life in every single state. That's my goal. But I think that people have to focus on what this case is all about. And it's about returning the decision to the states. It's not outlawing certain provisions right away.
All right, Attorney General Morrissey, really appreciate your time. Thank you for enlightening us on what West Virginia is doing, and thanks for fighting for life.
Thanks so much, Lindsay.